The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
Adam Laxalt can't be elected the next governor.
They want to take Nevada in an incredibly liberal direction and turn us into California.
Tonight on Politics Now, Republican Adam Laxalt and Democrat Steve Sisolak will face off in November to be Nevada's next governor, and the general election campaign is already underway.
I never underestimate Nevadans and the things that they are capable of.
The big election surprise was a win by brothel owner Dennis Hoff in an assembly race. We'll tackle what that means for the Republican Party going forward.
Nevada needs someone who's going to fight for them and not just bend in the wind.
And we interviewed Jacky Rosen about her bid for U.S. Senate and her top priority if she wins that race.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now with Steve Sebelius and Patrick Walker.
Well, primary night is in the books, and now we're moving to the general election. It's already here. Thanks for joining us. I'm Patrick Walker.
And I'm Steve Sebelius. Let's recap some of the big races, starting with the top of the ticket, the Democratic primary for governor. Steve Sisolak defeated fellow Clark County Commissioner Chris Giunciliani by double digits, despite Giunciliani getting some last-minute help from a robocall recorded by Hillary Clinton during the final weekend of the race. Although the primary was bitter, both candidates vowed to work together, and Sisolak says he'll be able to replenish his depleted campaign coffers.
I'm confident we're going to be able to raise the resources. Like I said, my phone's been ringing off the hook since for the last hour and a half, 2 hours. I've got a lot of really great supporters and donors that feel the same way I do, that Adam Laxalt can't be elected the next governor, and we're going to all pull together and work together. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, and I'm up for the challenge, and I'm confident that everybody working together, we can get this done.
This campaign has been about all of you, never about me. And it's always been about making sure that we expressed and showed the diversity of this state. And that's who you all are. And I'm not going away, okay?
Well, on the Republican side, Attorney General Adam Laxalt coasted to an easy win. Donald Trump even endorsed him on Twitter the day of the election. Here was what Laxalt had to say about his win.
We look forward to being able to contrast our message. We want to save Nevada. They want to take Nevada in an incredibly liberal direction and turn us into California. And I don't think voters in Nevada are going to go for that.
Well, the reason I asked Steve Sisolak about those empty campaign coffers was because of the large amounts of money we've already seen spent in the primary. To give you an idea of just how much money is being spent, we're talking in the millions. Ads for the governor's race aired nearly 13,000 times here in the Silver State. That's the 4th highest total in the country, and that was only in the primary. Steve, that's a number that's just going to balloon, I'm sure.
Yeah, this could be one of the most expensive governor's races probably in the entire country. I mean, both Sisolak and Laxalt are going to raise millions on their own, and the outside money is going to drive up those totals even more. But Laxalt starts the race in a much better position because, as you pointed out, he didn't have to spend much in the primary, while Sisolak had to spend almost everything to fend off that very aggressive challenge from Chris Giunciliani. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show.
Well, 2 of the congressional races had packed fields on just one side. Let's start with CD3, and that's the Republican side. Danny Tarkanian won a pretty sizable victory with Michelle Mortensen coming in 2nd place. Tarkanian switched to that race, if you remember, at the last minute after Trump suggested that he leave the Senate race, and that totally changed the dynamic. He will face Democrat Susie Lee in the general election.
And on the Democratic side of Congressional District 4, Stephen Horsford won the primary pretty handily as well, bidding to return to a seat he held from 2012 to 2014. He'll face the man who defeated him 4 years ago, Republican Crescent Hardy, in November.
Well, Steve, we've been talking about this quite a bit. It's a crazy dynamic that's shaped up in that CD4 race. The 2 former congressmen from that seat are now facing off for their old job.
Yeah, I mean, this seat has only been in existence for 3 election cycles. It's never been held by the same person 2 cycles in a row. One of these 2 guys, though, that used to represent this seat is going to be returning to Washington for sure. We know that.
All right. Well, also, let's talk about another interesting race, and that is one that quickly drew some national attention. We're talking about brothel owner Dennis Hoff beating incumbent Assemblyman James Oscarson. That was in AD 36 in the primary. Oscarson was one of the last Republicans who voted for the commerce tax, who was still serving in the legislature. Now, in that heavily Republican district, Hoff will face a Democrat named Leisha Romanoff. that state assembly caucus, however, the Republicans have said, Steve, that they are not going to be issuing an endorsement in the 80-36 race. What do you make of that?
And not only the assembly caucus, but also the top elected officials like Brian Sandoval, Adam Laxalt, Michael Roberson, Dean Heller, and AG nominee Wes Duncan. They're all saying that they don't endorse or support Hoff. Part of it has to do, I think, with allegations that have been made against Hoff about misconduct, and part of it has to do just with the current environment. I mean, the sexual harassment scandals that we've seen in media and politics and business have just kind of overwhelmed things. So I think all of those things are combining to make these Republicans kind of distance themselves from him. But, you know, Hoff is going to be a media darling if he gets to Carson City. You know, it looks very likely that he's going to get there. So I don't think he needs the help or the money.
The district's wide open for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, another outright winner on primary night, that was District Attorney Steve Wolfson. He beat out Attorney Robert Langford, who filed a run against him on the very last day. Since they're both Democrats and only two candidates in the race, Wolfson keeps his job. His name is going to appear on the November ballot all by itself. Langford had a lot of national money in his race, especially from George Soros-aligned PACs, but that money may have come too late in the race to help.
And Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo handily won re-election outright as well. He easily garnered the more than 50% that he needed to win it. Now, here's what he had to say he wants to focus on after the race going forward.
My platform's been based on continuing to hire more cops, expansion of the jail and their services associated with the jail, and how we deal with the mentally ill. The mentally ill encompasses a lot of things, you know, mental health, substance abuse, incarceration. We have to figure out a system or give the officers on the street tools to better find solutions versus incarceration.
And one of the closest races of the night, Tick Segerblum won the Democratic primary for Clark County Commissioner. It was a very nasty race. Segerblum, he's a former state lawmaker, beat challenger Marco Hernandez by just 181 votes.
Very nasty and very close, Steve. So let's step back just a hair. Let's talk about the big takeaways, the big picture overall from Tuesday night.
Yeah, one takeaway I found was the progressives and how they fell short in the primary. I mean, Chris Giuliani lost to Steve Sisolak with the Democratic establishment backing Sisolak. And it wasn't just the governor's race. In Congressional District 4, State Senator Pat Spearman and healthcare activist Amy Vilela came in second and third, respectively. Rob Langford, as we just mentioned, fell short in his bid to unseat District Attorney Steve Wolfson. And as we just mentioned, progressive Tick Segerblum, he barely won that county commission race. So progressives are still a vocal part of the Democratic Party, but perhaps they're not as politically powerful as they may have been in the past.
Right. We'll talk more about that actually later on in the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Nevada is going to be saying welcome back to a couple of familiar faces. We already told you about Congressional District 4, where former rivals Stephen Horsford and Crescent Hardy are fighting for a comeback. But over in State Senate District 8, two ex-assemblywomen won the right to challenge each other to take over the seat that Senator Patty Farley is giving up. Democrat Marilyn Dondero Loop ran for that seat in 2014, but she lost to Farley. And Assemblywoman Valerie Weber, who left office back in 2008, is back after 10 years to make another run for Senate. No matter what, one of the two is going to be serving in Carson City come the next legislature. And ironically enough, when Weber opted not to seek re-election back in 2008, it was Dondero Loop who replaced her in the Assembly.
Yeah, sounds like CD4 all over again,
absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Like I said, we recycle in Nevada.
Hey, there you go. Well, hey, we have a comprehensive list, all the coverage of the races, reaction, and what it means for all of us on LasVegasNow.com. Just look for the political news tab or the election headquarters tab. Well, tackling immigration reform.
It's just another example of how he's changed his positions from one to another.
Jacky Rosen tells us why she is attacking Dean Heller's stance on a potential DACA bill. That's next on Politics Now.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
Well, the Senate race shaped up exactly as we expected. Incumbent Republican Senator Dean Heller and his opponent, Democratic Congresswoman Jacky Rosen, both won by wide margins.
Well, I interviewed Rosen earlier this week about her race for Senate. Take a listen. Let's start with talking about the Republican tax cuts and the idea whether or not those should be repealed. My understanding is your policy is you would like to keep the middle class portion of those tax cuts intact, but repeal the tax cuts for higher income earners and for corporations. Is that accurate or no?
Well, actually, I support middle class tax cuts. That's a mouthful, right?
It is.
I support middle class tax cuts. But what we have to do is put this bill into balance. And so it's a little bit out of balance with corporate, big permanent corporate tax cuts, big oil, large corporations. For individuals, not permanent. So we need to be sure that we put it in balance, because corporations need to succeed, but without families succeeding, who's going to buy their goods and services? So what I want to do, put it into balance and keep those middle-class tax cuts, make them permanent, and I also want to be sure we don't balance anything on the balance is $1.8 trillion deficit on the backs of our senior citizens, Medicare and Social Security.
If you had a chance to repeal it in toto or leave it intact as is, how would you choose?
Well, I mean, I voted against it. And so what we have to do, it is the law of the land now. And so like a lot of things, you take what you have here and you work to make it better. And so that's what I'm going to focus on in all of my policies. What do we have now, and how can we make it better, more fair, and more balanced?
Senator Heller once voted for a comprehensive immigration reform bill. I believe that was back in 2013. More recently, he has said that he will not support any bill on DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, that is not also supported by President Trump. And President Trump has kind of not really come down specifically where he would be on any kind of bill. He said different things about where that would be. You criticized Senator Heller for saying that. Tell me why.
Well, I'll tell you, it's just another example of how he's changed his positions from one to another. So Dean Heller now, what he says is, I'm going to stand pretty much wherever the president does. So what that means to me, and what it should mean to Nevada voters, is that he isn't considering what's right for Nevada first. He's going to go to Washington, and whatever they tell him to do, he's going to do. He's not thinking for himself. He stood here with Governor Sandoval saying he wouldn't repeal health care, and then he went to Washington and he put his name on that Graham Cassidy Heller bill. And so I think it's just another example of how he's not fighting for Nevada. He's looking out for special interests, or for what are the interests of the president that may hurt Nevada families.
If you had to promise constituents, you know, one thing, you could only get one thing done in your first term as a senator if you were elected, what would that one thing be? What would that top priority of yours be?
Well, I want to tell you, I think it would be in the area of probably rural broadband, net neutrality. Really important, and I'm going to tell you why. Because it impacts healthcare with telemedicine and telehealth. It impacts education. It impacts ability for our state to grow in every single way. So if we have those two things on top of fixing healthcare and our tax reform, worrying about our education, our environment, we need that platform that we can do that on. So I think those are some really important issues.
We have a lot more of that interview on LasVegasNow.com, including why Rosen voted for a right-to-try bill but against the final version of the same legislation, and her new angle of attack against Yucca Mountain. That's on LasVegasNow.com.
Well, a wrench in the machine.
I think they vote for him because of his cowboy attitude.
Our face-off panel tackles brothel owner Dennis Hoff's win and the divides within the two parties.
And money is already pouring into the governor's race, the group putting 7 figures behind an assault on Steve Sisolak. That's next as Politics Now continues.
8 News Now, the Valley's news leader.
Well, with the primary in the books, we want to tackle the biggest election night surprise in this edition of Face Off. That's Dennis Hoff's win and what that says about party divides here in Nevada. Here's KXNT radio host Alan Stock and Battleborn Progress Executive Director Annette Magnus.
I thought there was a chance it could happen. I never underestimate Nevadans and the things that they are capable of. And so to me, it's unfortunate that he won. And what I think is more unfortunate now is you're seeing people like Adam Laxalt, even the governor, you're seeing other legislators starting to back away from Dennis Hoff now after the election, now that he's won. But just before the election, you saw Adam Laxalt tell James Oscarson to take his endorsement off his website because that was from 2016. So you can't have it both ways, Adam Laxalt. You can't have it so that 1 minute you're supporting James Oscarson, the next minute you're not supporting him, and now that Dennis Hoff has won, now suddenly you're anti-Dennis Hoff. I find it completely disingenuous and frankly disgusting that these Republicans now suddenly are horrified that Dennis Hoff got elected. This is their party. They need to own this.
You know, the Republican Party in this state is divided, and it's divided nationally in a lot of ways also, because you have the pro-Trump Republicans. I mean, it was Hoff calling himself the
Trump of Pahrump.
The Trump of Pahrump, and listen, he's a very, he was on my show yesterday. We talked about this for some time. He's out there as a libertarian conservative in a Republican district. He's going to win the election in November. It was a nasty campaign between two people who got to the point they really did not like each other at all. And in terms of the party supporting him or not, I mean, he came down on parts of the party on my show. You know, he was very, very verbal about that. Again, he's running as a conservative, fiscally conservative libertarian. He wants to overturn the commerce tax. He did mention that. That's one issue for him there. But I don't think people voted for him for that. And I think they voted for him because of his cowboy attitude. I mean, you know, he's a truly independent Nevadan of the old-fashioned Nevada type sense.
Is this going to be an issue in the November election where factions, two strong factions in each of the parties will have some sort of an impact that could wash things out, perhaps a split ticket at the top, as Alan brings up? We're
going to have to wait and see. I think, you know, the Roberson-Laxalt divide within the party is a real one. And so how does that play out? How does, you know, kind of the more extreme factions of both parties versus the more establishment factions play out? That is a real thing that we have to look at in both parties in Nevada. And so, you know, you'll also see it. Do Chris G supporters come along with Steve Sisolak? That's a question I think we all have, and I hope that's the case. The
more extreme socialist end of the Democrat Party, and then the, so to speak, the more moderate element. I'm not sure that Hillary's moderate, but you still have that division going on, and the same with the Republican Party with the Trump faction. I mean, is he a real right-winger, or is he more of a populist? And if people glommed onto him because of the populism that he's espoused. But the party itself, there is a definite division. There is a definite division, and there's a definite division in the Democrat Party also. You know, if under other circumstances in other countries, I could see us splitting into 4 parties.
You can also watch the panel debate Tick Segerblum's county commission race and Trump's summit with Kim Jong-un on LasVegasNow.com. Look for the political news tab. Patrick?
All right, Steve, time for the race now, where we talk about some of the other big news in the 2018 races. The Republican Governors Association sinking a lot of money into our governor's race. Politico is reporting the group has reserved $1.4 million in ad space here. It's one of 3 battleground states in which RAGA plans to start off with a combined $5 million ad buy. The Adam Laxalt campaign is firing salvos off of its own. About 11 hours after the primary results were in, they launched an ad here against Steve Sisolak. It's an ad that hits on Sisolak for winning millions of dollars from taxpayers in a lawsuit against the airport and accuses him of cronyism. And the voter turnout in the election was high by primary standards, but still kind of low compared to averages over the last 2 decades. With an open governor's seat, turnout still only reached 22.8%. That's higher than 2014, but not as high as usual for an open governor's seat. Over the past 20 years, primary turnout in gubernatorial years typically ranges from 27 to 30%. The 2014 year was an outlier, however, because Brian Sandoval only faced token opposition, and then none of these candidates won on the Democratic primary. So, Steve, why do we see the turnout peak for gubernatorial primaries versus presidential years? Usually you'd think it'd be the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's because Nevada uses the caucus system to nominate our presidential candidates. People don't go to the polls like they do on election day to nominate presidential candidates. The only exception really was back, I think, in 2004. That was when George W. Bush was running for re-election, and there was a 29% turnout in the primary. So there's always an exception.
Of course, the exceptions to the rules. Well, will the Dreamers get the vote they've been asking for? Our Washington, D.C. correspondent breaks down what the House of Representatives is taking up next week. And that's next on Politics Now.
And N Road. Let's go.
Well, earlier in the show, we talked a little bit about immigration bills. 2 of those bills may actually get to a vote next week.
So for this week's What to Watch, I asked our Washington, D.C. correspondent Alexandra Limon about it. We had heard from Senator Dean Heller in the past that when there's some sort of movement on an immigration bill, you'll hear about it, there will be a vote. Well, it sounds like there could be 2 votes next week. What do you know about that?
That's right. The House has said that they are going to vote on 2 different immigration bills. That was an announcement that Speaker Paul Ryan made this week. Now, one of the bills is a pretty hardline immigration bill, the Goodlatte-McCall bill. And the thing about that is, though, that a very similar bill to that failed in the Senate a couple of months ago. This bill essentially would change up the entire visa program, would decrease visas overall, would decrease family-based visas, and would end the diversity visa program, and would add some so-called merit-based visas. It would also add about 10,000 border agents, approve funding for a border wall, and some of the other things that the president has asked for. It also does include some limited protections for DACA recipients in the form of 3-year renewable programs, but it's permits, I should say, 3-year renewable work and school permits. But it's very unclear if this bill can even get enough support to pass the House, never mind the Senate.
Okay. Well, you can watch Alexandra Limon explain that second bill along with what happened with the discharge petitions, all of that on our website, LasVegasNow.com.
Yep, absolutely. So, you know, we're almost down to the last two for the finalists for the convention in 2020.
Yeah.
It's between us and Charlotte, so we'll see if we can pull it off.
Instead of Go Knights Go, it's Go Vegas Go now.
There
in
you
this
go.
case, right?
Well, thanks for watching Politics Now.
We'll see you next week. Hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Onward and upward.